All right, everybody, greetings. Welcome once again to the Rec Poker Podcast and YouTube video. I'm your host, Steve Fredland, and as always, we are sponsored by Running Aces, Racetrack and Casino. This is episode 131, and we're super excited because Jared Tendler has joined us. He was connected to us by one of our Rec Poker Nation folks, Jeffrey Lloyd. So thanks, Jeff, for making that connection. But I don't want to go any further with all that. Just get into the conversation, man. I'm just so excited. So many of us are just excited to talk to you, Jared. And first of all, man, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. That's awesome. Happy to be here, guys.
Now, where are you located right now? Where are you calling in from?
I'm in the Philly suburbs.
Okay. Are you a longtime Philly guy or?
No. My wife is from the area, so I'm a Northeast, kind of Connecticut. I say that mainly, I'm not an Eagles fan. I'm a Giants fan. So
well, of course, that's where I was going.
Yeah,
that's where I was going. As a Viking.
The roles are reversed. So, if there was a time to be a bandwagon Eagle fan, it would be now, but I can't.
Right. Okay. Well, good. Now we will continue the conversation then. we had to make sure that we got that out of the way first, but so,
yeah.
I mean, so people that I've talked to, I've looked at your website, all kinds of stuff. I see you're described as a performance coach. You're described as a leading expert in the mental game of poker, and we'll get into all that stuff. But how would you, I guess, describe what you do or who you are or kind of what you bring to the table here? How would you self-describe, getting away from all the promotional blitz and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I haven't found a good name. Psychologist would be the best word, but I don't have a PhD, so I can't use that word. So basically, I'm the guy that basically gets rid of emotional stuff that affects decision making. I think that is it in a nutshell. You get angry. You get upset, you get a little fearful, get a little anxious, lose a little motivation, lose some confidence. All of that can affect your decision making. And as the poker player, your decision making is your technique. That's where you make your money. If I was a golfer, if I was a basketball player, it's your body. It's your technique that you use to, shoot a jump shot or swing a golf club. Emotions can affect that technique as well. But as a poker player, your decision-making changes, right? You become more aggressive. You see opportunity that doesn't actually exist. You think that you're, going to get creative here and run a fancy bluff, and that's correct in that spot. But your mind is so compromised that you can't see or think clearly, and thus you make some pretty bad decisions.
And so do you work, I mean, obviously, you do a lot in the poker community. Do you do a lot of other work with other athletes or other people that, in other areas where the mental faculties need to be really sharp?
So I started in golf because that is the game that I kind of grew up playing and still play, at a decently high level. So I've got a handful of golfers, one of which I've been working with since he was 10 years old. He's now ranked in the top 50 on the web.com, which is pretty cool. Have a handful of other golfers, but I have a bunch of poker players. I've got day traders. A handful of sports bettors, horse bettors, cricket traders, pool players. I'm trying to think of other athletes. Yeah, I'd say most of my work is with non-athletes. If that makes sense. Oh, actually, and esports. Esports has been the other big one. I'm the mental game coach for an organization called Team Liquid. So essentially, professional video gamers have become another kind of big avenue for my work.
That is just, to me, I'm hyper interested in this already. First of all, I mean, you referred to poker players as non-athletes, which of course is a little offensive. I mean, we have to sit there for hours at a time.
Should be pretty accurate though, yeah.
Well, Steve's got the physique of an athlete though.
I can tell. I mean, the video,
it's obvious, right?
The camera adds 20 pounds of muscle. That's what it is.
Right, something like that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I always tell people I'm a world-class sitter. If that was an Olympic sport, I'd be there, man. That's why poker.
My wife would give you a run for her money.
I hope she'll agree that you said that.
Oh no, she knows. Yeah, it's
okay. Yeah. Well, I did see that you're actually quite a golfer too. I know one of the big goals you had was to qualify for a tournament. You did that. I forget which one it was. One of the Open Championships, right?
Well, yeah. So it was the U.S. Mid-Am. So the USGA is basically running big time amateur events in the U.S. So obviously the U.S. Amateur is the biggest one. The U.S. Open, biggest professional event in the U.S. But 6 years ago, geez, getting to age myself. I finally kind of broke through and qualified for the U.S. Mid-Am, which is basically everybody over 25. So everybody that has a job that can't just play 24/7. like I did when I was in college, gets chopped out, and then it's kind of us, kind of left over. But I've tried to qualify for the U.S. Open this past Monday, and missed the playoff by 2 shots. So I still can get it around, even though I'm honestly playing 15, 20 times a year, practicing not much more than that. So, I've kind of figured out how to get it around really well. It's not my mental game anymore. It was, 20 years ago. Now it's just I don't play enough, so my game is, just kind of rusty. So.
Yeah. Okay. So really focusing on the business side of things too here.
Yeah. I've got a 5-year-old and a house and a mortgage and
okay.
Life happens, so dreams get put on hold.
Yeah. Well, that maybe is your dream. See, that is your dream, right? The wife, the family, the kid, and all those things.
Yeah, it's a different dream.
It's a different okay.
Well, I think we all have our selfish dream, like the dreams that
yeah.
If that was my entire life, I would be miserable. So I mean, but the other thing too is I love my work. I mean, I like without that, I would kind of miss a big part of myself. So I've written 2 books, and like the process of writing material is really rewarding because I learn a lot from it. Obviously I get to kind of put out this product and, it's great to get feedback and, sell a bunch and all the rest of it. But even if I didn't sell it, like I become an exponentially better coach just from going through that process. And I'm going through that process again, fortunately not for poker players, but for day traders right now. But like, the last 3 months since I've really kind of dove deep in the book writing process again, like I can feel just like the clarity within a session. And it's not unlike what you as poker players, experience too, right? There's times where your head is in a fog and you're just not thinking clearly. It's hard to stay focused. And that could happen for many, many reasons. One of which for me is that my brain just gets too full of a bunch of crap and I need to synthesize it. I need to organize it. And writing is like the best way for me to do that. And the concept that I sort of describe this as is called bloated brain. If you ate a bunch of food, right, your stomach gets full and it becomes hard for you to have enough energy, right? When poker players are playing for long sessions, or they've been studying for hours, or they have a period where they're just learning a ton and haven't had a chance to really just go play, your brain can get full too. And so your decision making gets a little bit foggier and things get a little bit muddier, and it's just harder to pick up on all the subtle details. But once your mind is clear again, man, that's when all things are firing and you just start seeing things. And I'm the same way. So, we're kind of playing the same game, so to speak. It's just, lots of different nuances.
Oh man, that's so cool. And just so too, we got with the panel here, and I told everybody if you have questions, just fire away to you. But I've got a million questions. I mean, so starting with, obviously you're working with a diverse set of people with the common trait that they all need to be mentally, aware and mentally clear. So what is like that big common thread that you see as people's biggest challenges? I mean, you can focus on poker or even more broadly. Is it bloated brain? Or is it, some version of tilt, or is it some version of, letting emotions override the logical decision? Like, I'm sure you'll say all of it, but just kind of what are those key things that you just see as an expert from a distance go, man, this is clearly the biggest issue that people are facing?
The biggest issue people face is their lack of awareness of the effect that emotions have on their decision making. Now, that can be anger, and that's the biggest issue in poker. So bloated brain is definitely like a more advanced problem. If you have big time tilt issues, big time anger issues, bloated brain ain't your problem, right? Like you're losing a ton of value because those decisions that you're making when you're tilted are just costing you so much. But the reason I kind of preface all of that by saying the biggest issue is just not lack of awareness is that a lot of poker players just aren't aware that the emotions are even affecting them to that degree.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to watch on TV and see Phil just like blow up and, rant and rave like a lunatic. And obviously some of it's for show. Some of it is real too. And say, oh, well, I'm not like that. So then because of that, I'm not, making bad decisions. But, the internal tilters are there. And like the ways in which like the pressure can start to really ramp up and affect your decision making, it's sometimes is hard to like really fully identify that emotions are affecting that much if you're like most guys, and I'm not, being a little bit sexist here and saying that it's just a guy problem, because women have this too, but by and large, guys are just dumb. Like they just can't see. They just can't see it. And I've had a lot of wives thank me because I've helped wake up their husbands to things that they've been saying for a long time, but they haven't been able to see in the context of their personal life. But within poker, because it's so contained, it becomes a lot easier. And so the easiest way you can begin to start to like really be aware of this is to like write out the ways in which your mind thinks through a decision when you're playing great and when you're playing terribly. Think about the factors that disappear. Think about the factors that you incorrectly are weighing. Think about the mistakes that you tend to make the most when you are playing your worst. And then once you identify those things, start to pay attention to what's happening just prior to those decisions. Now, it could be that you're losing focus. It could be that you're losing energy, at the end of a long session, at the end of a long tournament. It could be those things. But it also can be that subtle frustration had been building over the prior half hour, and you were making some small mistakes that then was not only pissing you off because you were making mistakes, but you're losing, and it became this sort of snowball, and then you sort of snapped. And so maybe you're aware of like the big anger that shows up there, but you're not aware of the rise that existed. You thought it just came out of nowhere and just overtook you, like you're just like it just happened. And so then you tell yourself, oh, I'm not going to make those big mistakes again. But you can't stop a freight train unless you stop it early on. And so being aware of this early rise of the escalation of anger. And the same could be true of loss of focus or energy. It doesn't have to be emotional stuff, but you can stop things when it's small. When they get big, when you're really bored because you've been card dead for an hour, when you're really tired because you really haven't been paying attention to your physical energy for a while, like recovering that is so hard. But recovering it when it's small is not easy always, but it's certainly a hell of a lot easier,
So it sounds like there's two issues, right? There's identifying when these things are happening, and then there's handling them when they do happen, right? Whether it's either early on or it's escalated, either way, it's a problem. So I guess when you're as people start to identify these issues, is a lot of what you deal with helping them stop these emotions from happening at all in the first place? Or is it more around recognizing when they're happening and then knowing how to mentally handle those things? Because it seems like sometimes the emotions, as much as we want to say, I'm going to stop feeling that way, that seems like that's a harder thing to stop than knowing what to do once that emotion comes. Or how do you kind of walk people through that?
Yeah. Well, so when you say, like knowing that you're getting pissed off and saying you just like don't do that, the only way that works is if the cause is super simple. But for most players, it's not that simple. So control from a mental and emotional standpoint comes through having a correction that corrects the cause of that emotional problem. So I'll just kind of pour through this.
Yeah.
Step one is awareness. You can't stop something you can't see. Once you see it, doesn't mean you can stop it. And this is like the most vital piece of knowledge that I can give anybody, because it's the most common mistake that poker players make. And frankly, players in every industry make the exact same mistake. So it's not just poker players. It's thinking that once you become aware of it, that the awareness is enough to stop it. And sometimes that is true in the short term, right? There's this sort of surge of motivation, inspiration, and you're like, yeah, right, I figured it out, nailed it, right? I'm going to get it. And you see the frustration rise. You're like, Dad, I'm not getting pissed off. Sorry if it's a, and so you use that inspiration to stop it dead in its tracks. And then one slips by and all of a sudden tilt happens. And now you're like, oh, well, that strategy doesn't work. Clearly I haven't fixed the problem, and you're right back to square one. So awareness really only works, A, if the problem is super simple, B, in the short term when you're full of motivation, full of inspiration. So to like convert the awareness into control requires having an understanding of what's causing it. And so basically what I deal with is this like layer of performance flaws that, all people kind of make in all these industries, especially poker. And once you have identified the performance flaw and have formulated a strategy to correct it, which again, I'm kind of yada-yadaing over for a second, but once you do that and you gain enough repetitions, eventually you'll get to the point where the emotion does disappear. I call it resolution. Right? Best way you can understand resolution is like imagine having an argument with your spouse, with a friend, and you can feel the tension kind of between the two of you until you like talk it out and come to some understanding. Once that happens, it's like the emotion's gone, right? It disappears and you just go around, hanging out like everything's normal. But until that point, man, you can feel, the tension that exists between you. So that's resolution, and it can happen internally for each of us as it relates to the causes of our tilt or fear, or confidence problems, right? And that is the end goal, because control requires mental energy, and mental energy has a limited capacity, right? We only have so much space to think. And if you're using part of that space to think to control your emotions, then here's the pie chart, right? So here's the pie chart. Got 100% of focus. You're in the zone, using all of it just for focusing on tactical decision making. But if part of it is now being consumed by the emotion, right? So anger takes up space. Then another chunk is taken up, but for fighting against the anger, now you got 25% that is battling this internal thing, and now you got 75% left to play well. So it's just a math problem, right? You need to solve these and not rely just on control and awareness, but actually work towards resolution. So you build awareness. Now, how do you build awareness? Take notes while you play, right? I gave you the map earlier. Just pay attention to your biggest mistakes. What's happening around those times, right? What are the circumstances? What factors might be at play? Is it against particular types of opponents in particular types of games? Like, does it happen against fish, right? So a lot of players, they play worse against fish. A lot of players play worse against better players. A lot of players play worse at the beginning of a tournament. Some players play worse at the end of a tournament. So like you just kind of like matching up the details of what's going on. Another big one, pay attention to the thoughts that come into your head. How could I be so effing stupid, right? Well, that's going to relate to a mistake. I can't believe this happened again. That's going to relate to, dealing with some run bad, right? And so if you start to map the thoughts that you have in your head, then again, you've now connected. When I have this thought, it means that I am tilting for this reason. And you know immediately that it's time to spring into action and use your strategy to gain control. Now, here's the strategy to gain control. Okay. For me, the most simple way, especially if you're playing live poker, is to take a couple deep breaths. So you become aware of it, take a couple deep breaths. Why? Because you don't want to give off any information. And taking a deep breath in this moment is the equivalent of like getting up and walking away. Sometimes you can't do that in the middle of the hand. Sometimes you can do it in the middle of your session, but you don't want to have to get up and walk away every time something happens at the table, because people are going to start to think you're either tilted or you get the point. So taking a few deep breaths just gives you a little bit of separation between the reaction and the correction, which is going to come next. Now, the correction in the short term, for anybody who's listening and for you guys here, is for right now, just come up with some logic that can correct the reason why you're getting tilted or fearful, etc. Like we all have, right, things that we tell ourselves, logic that we have in our minds that sometimes can be helpful. Right? More often than not, what happens is the steamroll effect is that you have this reaction and then more thoughts kind of pile on top of it, and it makes it worse. It just lets like gasoline on a grease fire. And so if you recognize that that's beginning, take a deep breath, and then inject logic to counter that, you can at least stop it in its tracks and begin to fight against it. Now, over the long term, you really want to get to the root of the issue. You want to identify the performance flaw that is at the heart of this problem and have your logic directly correct that, versus what many of you will come up with on your own, which will sound good, and may be accurate to a degree, but won't get to the whole thing. To achieve resolution is a lot like pulling a weed out, right? You got to yank out the roots. If you just chop off the top, the sucker's going to grow back. And so the logic that many of you will come up with will be the equivalent of just chopping off the leaves. And my first book was really designed entirely to give poker players the ability to sort of self-diagnose what performance flaws they were suffering from, and be able to have them, either like use the logic that I provide or come up with their own logic that they can use. But once you've gone through this process of coming up with good logic, then it is just about repetition. Awareness, deep breath, inject logic. Awareness, deep breath, like just keep firing away. It's no different than a golfer on the driving range hitting golf balls for hours trying to hone their swing. You got to use your mind as a tool. And as a tool, it needs to be trained and sharpened over time. So playing poker is the best way to sharpen it as long as you're prepared. So you write this stuff down, you write your strategy down before you go play. You take a few minutes to really think deeply about it. Remember those points of awareness. So once you sense them, you spring into action, and you fight. And you fight as hard as you can and as long as you can. And then once you can't, you're either going to get run over by the emotion, or you got to quit and to pick it up for another day.
So I should mention, I know you've written 2 volumes of The Mental Game of Poker, and I see you get all these raving reviews. Ben Toller and Greg Merson, all these folks that are saying great things about it, and I know some of the folks on the panel have read it and love it as well. I'm curious, in that example, or in sort of this idea of the deep breaths and then the logic piece of it, can you just give us like just a quick example of how that would work? I think about, in the recreational player world, like I see this all the time. We play lower stakes, or I play lower stakes, and you see the guy opens with queen 4 offsuit, and somebody 3-bets him with ace king, and the guy calls, the donkey calls, and the flop comes ace queen 4, and all of a sudden he's out of the tournament, and you see just this this livid reaction. And I'm just curious, like for somebody who has that sort of anger issue, I guess targeting a quote unquote donkey, or a guy that made a bad play and got there. Like, what's just an idea of how do they inject logic into that once they realize that, once they become aware, once they take the deep breath, now the logic, like what's the logic to counteract that some players are going to play bad and still win?
So that example could be, could come from 3 different types of tilt, right? It could be entitlement tilt, which is the classic Phil Hellmuth tilt, right? And so entitlement tilt comes from this belief that because you are the better and superior poker player, that you deserve to win.
Yeah, you hear that all the time. I only get beat by luck, by bad luck. If it wasn't for bad luck, I'd win every tournament. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. So now that actually, so run bad tilt and justice tilt might be in there too. Like it can be like a just like kind of cocktail of crap between these few different types of tilt. And it is important to kind of carve out and chop out each piece, because if you only get like the entitlement tilt and the injustice tilt still there, it's going to lower the overall amount of tilt that's there, but the injustice is going to keep flaring up. So the entitlement tilt is, I deserve to win because I work harder, I'm smarter, you're stupid, I've played longer, I've had more results, whatever rationale somebody says to make them feel like they're the superior player, they deserve to win for those reasons. Now, at the heart of entitlement tilt is overconfidence, right?
Yeah.
You believe that your shit doesn't stink. And so actually working to get your confidence back in line is something that likely needs to happen overall, not just in these spots, right? You got to look for small instances where you're getting a little bit overconfident, and that can happen when you're running well. So one of the hardest things for poker players to do is to think realistically when they're running well, and that you're overconfident when you're running well when you stop thinking that bad things can happen.
Yeah.
When you're just gonna feel like you're just gonna keep printing money and there's nothing bad's gonna happen. All your bluffs are gonna get through, etc. So just keep an eye out for where overconfidence can exist elsewhere. And then you got to really work hard to come up with logic for that, which is, so an example of logic to correct overconfidence could be, my shit doesn't stink. Or sorry, my shit does stink, right? Like, I put on pants just like everybody else does, right? Like I'm no better just because I believe I'm better, right? And so, that's one. Like thinking that I'm better is like a surefire way for me to miss small details. I mean, if you're overconfident, you are not picking up on every detail because you're basically telling your mind, I don't need to think to win. And so you're essentially asking yourself to play worse. So you can inject logic to that point as well. So that could be one part of it. The other part of that tilt could be injustice tilt, right? Now, injustice tilt is essentially thinking that you get a larger share of bad luck. Now, it could be simply that you have a failure in just really embracing and understanding the realities of variance, right? For many poker players, some of their tilt can be just taken care of by just truly embracing those realities. Now, sometimes players have a hard time doing that because they wish that they could control variance. They wish that they were above it. Wouldn't it be cool if I could just run well all the time? Like there's this kind of fantasy notion to it. And, some poker players get into the game also because, they get into a little bit of the mythology, the Chris Moneymakers, the guys that just, come out of nowhere and win bunches, huge amounts of money, or they just see, the top pay scale on the tournament and just imagine what it would be like to win all of that money. And then when it gets taken from them, it's like a part of their soul gets taken with them. But really what happens is the wish that they could control variance and have those kinds of outcomes just essentially collides with the reality that's just not going to accept it. So you have to kind of come up with some logic statements that help you to embrace the realities of variance. Another one actually, though, is to correct the instances where you played poorly but got lucky. It's so easy to just kind of think that you deserved, the 35%,
right.
Get there kind of on the Turner River, flush draws, straight draws. When you got to understand that the you had to get a little bit lucky there, right? Maybe you got it in good in your own mind, but maybe you didn't. And either way, you've got to acknowledge that the role that variance at least helped you there, right? If you're expecting to get lucky, then you just don't pay any attention to that. And so you have to amplify and really emphasize those instances where you're getting good luck. And then that actually makes it easier for you to handle the instances when the luck is kind of going against you. Now the other one is hate losing tilt. So, the rage that comes after busting to a donkey play sometimes can just be about just hating to lose. People are very, very competitive, and it doesn't really matter how they lose. It can be made worse, getting called with queen 4 off. But the fact that they lost is really challenging. So what we have to figure out in those instances is like what really is on the line, right? Competitiveness for people that are affected that much, oftentimes it's related to the actual money. It's related to their goals. The money could mean kind of finances and an extra vacation or all these things. Like what else is on the line? It can also be confidence, right? So a lot of our identity can get wrapped up in the game. For me with golf, huge part of my identity. But now it's in a place where it has greater balance. It's not the be all end all. I have places in my life where I am really successful, really happy, and really proud. So if I have a bad day of golf where I missed qualifying for playoff by 2 shots, it still hurts, as well it should. I'm competitive as hell. I want to do well.
Right.
But it's balanced in the fact that it doesn't consume all of my identity like it did when I was 17 or 18. But some of us, right, poker players into our later lives, it can mean a lot. Perhaps if things are not going as well in your personal life, poker becomes the outlet where you need a victory. And so you're basically asking more from poker than it really can give you. So whatever the cause of that kind of excessive competitiveness, you just got to understand that poker is not going to basically kind of pay you back on those things. You got to make it more simple, right?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. That's really, really good stuff. I've got more questions, but I do want to open it up for the panel if anybody had anything.
No, I read the first book, Mental Game of Poker, and the one thing you said is you don't read the book cover to cover. and expect to learn anything. But you had a learning model in there. It's like kind of like an inchworm, I guess you could call it, where
exactly.
you slowly but surely gain more competence in the A side of your game, and you're presenting your C side of your game a little less each time, and you go as you go forward. Well, I thought that was a very interesting concept, and I've been using that when it comes to tilt, because I used to get that entitlement tilt really bad. In the example that Steve gave, I would be just pissed. And then I realized at some point in time that, hey, the guy made a stupid move, but don't you want him to do that when you've got the goods? And when you start doing that, that kind of made that inchworm go up a little bit, so that entitlement tilt didn't happen so much anymore. It was kind of cool.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Chris,
the big thing with inchworm is being able to make sure that back end. So in essence, for those who aren't familiar with the concept, you basically have to suck less, right? To move your A game forward, right, your C game has to suck less. So when you have the opportunity to play bad for whatever reason, you have to play a little bit less crappy.
Interesting. Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, Jared, you talked about sort of dealing with these moments sort of in the moment, like, take a deep breath and first of all, understand and recognize what's going on about yourself, and then take a deep breath and try to find ways to control it. But are there ways that players or people that you work with in any kind of endeavor can do this kind of work off the felt or off the course or whatever? I mean, are there things that people can do in preparation before they come to play? Like, is it meditation or is it whatever? I mean, are there things that people can do that make them more effective in those moments?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so meditation, I think, can help train that kind of mental muscle. I think people overuse it when they use meditation to use it as a form of resolution. If you are learning things during your meditation, that's what can create the resolution. But meditation for me is primarily like a tool to build awareness, build mental control, and work towards resolution. It's not a cure like some people kind of can think it is. A way to practice would be, so now, for online poker players, a lot of they have, or if you have, like a hand tracking application that you might use to import live hands, you could load up a bunch of hands where you made mistakes, and you could, kind of have those hands play out and try to reimagine your emotional reaction in that, and like go through the process of being aware of the signs, taking a couple deep breaths, and injecting logic through those mistakes. And so if you loaded up 10 hands, it takes you 5 minutes to go through the process. But in essence, you're just kind of warming up, that kind of routine of going through those steps. Another thing is you could write out a paragraph. So, when the logic is really simple for a pretty simple problem, you don't need to do this. But if the emotions are pretty intense and the problem is somewhat complex, write up a whole paragraph, or even take sections of my book or sections of things you read online, or cull together like a kind of a beefier injecting logic thing, and memorize it. Treat it like it's a speech, right? And work on it steadily over days or weeks, and be able to just, like, at a moment's notice, just be able to say the entire paragraph. Once you get to that point, then connect a single phrase or word to that paragraph, so that in the moment while you're playing poker, you can have that one word become a trigger for the entire correction of that paragraph. It becomes kind of like a beefier way of kind of downloading all of that into that singular moment, where you don't have time to have that kind of 1 minute long speech to yourself. Obviously, if things get real bad, you go to the bathroom and you give yourself the full thing, like you're Newt Rockney or something. So that's another one. I think a really valuable and important thing to do is doing writing, like taking some notes at the end of your sessions, at the end of your tournaments, even on breaks. So if you're playing, tournament, every level, take a few notes down. We talked earlier about bloated brain. It's helpful for that, but it's also helpful to release some of the accumulated emotion. Now, one of the big things that happens with running bad is that, day after day, the more that you're tilting and the more that you're playing bad and the more that, things build up, it becomes easier and easier for you to tilt or for you to get anxious, for you to lose confidence. And part of that reason is because at the end of the day, there's still water, kind of in your glass. And so when you show back up the next day, there's a bit more still in there. So you're not kind of starting clear, not starting fresh as much as you might tell yourself, today's a new day, and you're just going to go out and play great. You may not be like really being honest that there's more emotion kind of in there. And so then it becomes easier for you to tilt, easier for you to overreact. So writing can be a tool to kind of unload some of that. And it can also become a tool for you to create additional repetitions. So what oftentimes can happen is in your writing, you're basically saying all the things that you shouldn't be thinking, right? And it's important to do that because once you kind of get that crazy out of you, then there's a chance for the logic to kind of come in and work. So often, the logic just can't get in there because there's too much emotion blocking it. But you go out and just do a bunch of writing, all of a sudden now you can get that logic in there. Now, I say writing versus like talking. A lot of people like to vent. If I had a nickel for every bad beat story I heard, right? We know that deal. And my God, the World Series is brutal. I mean, you go out, on break, and it's just a cacophony of bad beat stories, and every one has the same kind of arc to it. And the funny thing is, it doesn't matter what language they're speaking either. It's the same intonation and pacing. It's all the same. It just all runs together. But so venting doesn't do a whole lot because when you do it to another person, there's this hidden assumption in there that says that I'm no longer responsible. Mm-hmm. I've gotten this off my chest. Bad beat's done. Game over. Guess what? You haven't learned anything about how to handle the next bad beat. And what you've done is you've created greater dependency on now needing somebody else to go bitch and moan to. So writing makes you responsible and accountable for actually learning how to improve how you handle bad luck. And so, yes, you can vent, but then go write and get it down on paper, get down what you're learning, because that really is kind of holding your feet to the fire to actually do something about it rather than just pretend like you are.
That's great, man. So I know you've worked with some of the big name people that a lot of us recreational players have heard of. I'm sure I don't have the full list, but I know Kristen McNell, Max Steinberg, Kenny Hollert, a number of people that you've worked with. And obviously I don't want you to have to reveal their big secrets or whatever, but sort of what are those, working with them as you think about the obstacles they've had to overcome or how you were able to help them have greater mental focus or acuity. And then you think about kind of the recreational player that's never really worked on this stuff at all. We get a bad beat, and then the next time we say, okay, I'm okay now. We just convince ourselves that we're okay, even though, 2 hours later, we're still thinking about that and using our emotional energy. Like what do you see as kind of the differentiators there? I mean, I know there's a ton of different tilts, a ton of different emotional things, but what are those where can we take the biggest step, I guess is probably the question below the question, to really kind of get to that next level that you see these folks operating at?
I mean, it's tricky because on the one hand, I want to say get better at poker,
right?
Because it's sometimes sometimes that's the answer to the emotional side, right? Mm-hmm. Like so, in the bad beat example, if as a player you knew that it didn't matter that you got 1 outage here, like you could still kind of command the table. It makes it so much easier to deal with that. Right. But when you need luck to be in your favor, to have like a real shot of feeling that kind of command and building a big chip stack, knowing what you're doing, it's tough, right? Like one of the biggest problems recreational players have is just dealing with uncertainty. There is so much uncertainty in this game, and the best players in the world feel it too. Okay. But they have so much larger of a knowledge base that they can just kind of use that to converge on the unknown, make it smaller, and then make whatever things that are there something that's just going to help them more and more. Like they have a process to actually get better than recreational players do too. right? So not only are they better at the game today, but their growth curve is a lot higher. Just like even if you were starting at the same place, starting totally from scratch in a new game, because they're better at learning poker, they're going to get there faster, and they have that confidence that they will because they have that process. So those two things combined create a ton of confidence, and that confidence really takes away a lot of uncertainty. And uncertainty is one of those things that just is, really kind of beneath the surface for a lot of recreational players. And the only like real antidote to that uncertainty is to become really overconfident and be like the prototypical fish, which is a player that is so bad that they don't know how bad they are. And obviously that's not what you want. So, I was being a little tongue in cheek there, but so like the real solution now that we're talking about it is to be able to handle uncertainty better. It's not about the bad beat per se. It's to say, you know what? It's okay. I'm not going to know everything, but I believe that I can keep figuring this out. I will work on it, and you do the work, as much as you have time for, right? Analyze a couple hands afterwards. Talk to some people better. Read some books. Watch some videos. Read some articles. There's a ton of resources out there. I think one of the biggest problems that recreational players have is that they think that they have to put in either a ton of time or that they put in no time whatsoever and just think they're going to just kind of like learn on the fly. I think you can look at it in learn in small spaces, right? You learn enough to keep the game fun and enjoyable and exciting, and kind of take away some of that uncertainty. Not so much that you suck all the life out of it, and not so little that you become overconfident.
That's great, man. Good stuff. Anything from our panel? Any other burning questions? You'll make me go to question number 5 of my 6 million that I have. Well, we're actually, we only have about 8 minutes left or so. I want to honor our time with you. I mean, I appreciate this so much. One thing I'd be curious to know if you're willing to share. Just give us a funny story. Is there any sort of a fun example? You don't have to name names, but something where it's like, oh, this person really is, either really has an issue that they have to resolve, or just sort of, has reactions that were kind of like over the top, whether it's in golf or poker or otherwise. Just sort of an amusing day at the office for you.
And I can give you a couple. So one is a story that's in the first book. So that one's pretty clean, but it was really kind of shocking when I first heard it. But one of my early clients, he did not recognize that he was tilted until he lost 10 buy-ins. That was the only way that he knew that he was angry. Like, had no awareness whatsoever. And it was like shocking to think that somebody could be that blind. But as it turns out, not only was it true, but there were others like him. That was one. Another one is a trader that I was working with. Had so much accumulated emotion, and there was a ton back there, and was getting to the point where he was like literally like holding one hand back with the mouse to try to prevent him from making trades that he knew he shouldn't. And poker players do this online and live. I mean, I'm sure many of your listeners will know the experience of thinking fold, and then having their hands grab chips and put them in the middle of the table, and having no idea how in the world the exorcist somehow got inside of them and made their hand move. But it was just he knew it. He knew it was crazy. He knew what was going on, and just like I said, awareness does not equal control, and that was a prime example of it. Yada yada yada. Several sessions later, we got to the root of it, and he's better for it now. But that was some remarkable tilt
right.
on both sides.
Good stuff. Anything else, guys? Chris? Yeah, Chris. There you go.
So one of the things that I sometimes struggle with is, I'm not perfect. I get angry about things, and I try to deal with them in terms of the variance of the game and the actual things that happen. But the thing that I notice throws me off the most is when there is a player who is intentionally trying to tilt others, or maybe is being abusive to a dealer, or is being, and it's just really a kind of a jerk. And I noticed that my focus gets more about this person rather than my play, and I lose focus on playing well, and it's more like, God, I hope this person gets knocked out. I'm going to knock this person out. Da, da, da. And I'm wondering, is that a kind of identifiable tilt, and how you might sort of work on dealing with difficult personalities at the table?
Yeah, I mean, would you say there's a degree of revenge in there?
Yeah, maybe there is. Yeah, it's something about how it's not really, it's usually not when it's aimed at me. I feel like I get this way more when it's aimed at like a dealer who I just I don't want the dealers to get quit or whatever because they make this game so great, or maybe a player, maybe it's somebody who's a woman who's at the table, and like there's some like weird things said in that line, and I just feel like I just get really frustrated and angry about it.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like,
is there like a social justice component to this?
Yeah, I would say yes.
Okay. How skilled are you at that thing in your life, period? Like being able to like stand up for, somebody getting braided at the coffee shop, or like, situations like kind of exist in day-to-day life.
I'm pretty good at it, but I'm pretty terrible at the poker table.
Okay.
Like I don't know what to do in those, like.
Do you think about it ahead of time, or only in that moment?
Only in that moment.
Yeah, so that's the mistake. So like, okay. I would just like think about how you can like just like you would strategize for poker situations that are challenging. Right now, here's kind of like a game around the game. Strategize around how you can, like kind of George Costanza at the moment, and like come up with the good lines, ahead of time, and not come up with jerk store afterwards. So that's one component to it. Because a lot of times, like the situation is difficult for you in the moment because you can't think of the thing that is going to kind of nail him. The other piece is a degree of control, right? Like you want to put him in his place. And, listen, with social justice stuff and like revenge has a place in society, right? It's how we kind of have the social contracts and kind of follow the lines where, the rules are, like, we can't have rules for everything, right? So we need to have a society that's be able to kind of put people in their place when it needs to be, which is essentially what you're looking for. So, there may be an excessive desire for control, but we don't know that until you've actually exercised the thoughtfulness and the strategicness ahead of time to see if that actually works. And if you give it your best shot and you fail, then you can start to see like, is it because are you still struggling with it because you still haven't figured out that one line, or is there a part of you that just wants him to fall in line and you want to basically be able to control him like the way that you might want to control how he's playing, which is obviously not real. So then you have to fight against and correct that illusion of control that you can actually control somebody else when ultimately what you're looking for is influence, right? And that's what the social justice piece is about.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, yeah.
Good stuff here. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap it up there. And the time just flew by. We could talk for another 10 hours. But if you want to hear more from Jared, we could. I mean, honestly, I've got a lot of questions there. But Mental Game of Poker is the book, volumes 1 and 2, I believe. You also have the podcast, The Mental Game, right? He's written in the Poker Satellite Strategy book by Dara O'Kearney. And also Jonathan Little's Excelling at No Limit Hold'em. Podcast, guests everywhere, articles everywhere, everything kind of JaredTendlerPoker.com, right? Is that kind of the stopping point for people to connect with you?
It is, yeah, absolutely. And the audiobook for both books are available for free on Audible. So if you go to JaredTendlerPoker.com/free, you can get details on how to get the audiobook for free, which, unfortunately, I think a lot of poker players end up listening while they're playing, but I guess there are worse things to listen to if that's what they're doing.
There are worse things. Yeah, so I'll put those links out on the podcast too. But
okay.
Shoot me know, Jared, too, if there's anything that you want to have me link to. Otherwise, we'll send them to the website, and then they can figure it out from there where they want to go. So, all right, Jared, thank you very, very much.
See you guys. Thanks
That
for
was
having me.
fantastic. Yeah. Take
Awesome.
care.
Jared.
Cheers.
I think he came up with a lot of content right there that the Rec Poker Nation could really use right away. I mean, he didn't, it's not something like, well, now you got to go read his book to figure out what he's talking about. I mean, he gave us a lot of really good content right there that you can take and start learning from. I thought it was great. I thought he did a great job there.
Yeah, I thought it was a phenomenal interview.
Yeah, I liked. I wish you would have gotten a little bit more explained, more details on the inchworm thing, because I think that's one of his best points. It's kind of about your level of competence on the things, and there are I think there's 4 levels. I don't remember if I got them all right. Rob, you can help me out if you remember.
Yeah, I think that might be it. It's in his book. Have you read
I think
book?
it's yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like there's unconscious incompetence. You're bad and you don't know you're bad. Then there's conscious incompetence. You're bad, but at least you know you're bad. Then there's conscious competence, meaning if you work really hard at it, you can do the right thing and you can be good, but it takes a lot of effort. And then the final state is unconscious competence. That's when all of a sudden it's not effort to do it anymore. It's kind of like driving. You drive somewhere, you don't even know how you got there anymore because you no longer need to spend any mental energy on it. And to me, that's one of the keys, is getting to the point where the important things become unconscious competence so that you can then free your mind to devote to other things. And you just keep on trying to raise that bar. That's the inchworm thing. Eventually, you go an inch at a time, but eventually you go a whole mile. And you get a whole raft of things that you don't need to think about anymore so that you can think about new things. And I think that applies to not only the mental game, but also to strategy or anything, really.
And was his point with that in the book? And I haven't read the book, but that's the idea of how you get better as a player so that then your mental capacity is freed up? That's kind of what he was saying with our stuff too, is like sometimes you just got to get better at poker. You can't just fix everything emotionally.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, he talked about the inchworm is about how you have your A game, your B game, and your C game. And most of your decisions that you make at the poker table, if you look at it, it's like a bell curve. It's mostly right there in your B game. And then it slacks off to your C game and then slacks off to your A game. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to eliminate more of those C game issues and add to your A game issues. And then as you do that, it's like an inchworm. That bell curve, that middle part of it, will go more towards the A game, but it just keeps moving. So as you get better and you practice more and you learn more, that whole the bell curve just kind of shifts more and more towards the A game.
I love it.
The thing I really appreciate about both his book and what we talked about tonight is this idea of I think there's this really simplistic idea of tilt out there, that it's basically and like he mentioned, it's Phil Hellmuth, right? It's and people see that and say, well, I don't do that, so I don't tilt. And in reading his book, I think it's really this idea of there's so many different kinds of tilt, and it's not just this high profile blow up, but there's a whole bunch of different ways you can get there, and really being able to identify that in yourself, I think, is a really important thing that he talked about and to sort of think about in your own game. So that's what I take away from him, and I really like about it.
Yeah, I really love that, especially when he went through the anger one, and I don't know if there's more than 3, but the 3 sort of examples that he brought up, is it entitlement tilt, is it injustice tilt, or is it hate losing tilt? And if you don't know which one is really driving that, you don't really know how to fix it. Mm-hmm. Like if your issue is it's injustice, it's just not fair. It's just not fair that they got there. Well, then you're not really going to be able to fix that with some sort of a correction around how much you hate to lose. I think that's a huge insight to not just say, oh, I get on tilt when I lose, or like in my case, I feel like I get on more tilt on the positive side, which he touched on a little bit, it feels like now, the insight for me, as you're saying, Chris, is not enough just to say, okay, it's positive tilt or negative tilt. It's, well, what's really driving it? What's the truth behind it that I'm not accepting or whatever? Otherwise, I'm never going to know how to fix it if I don't really figure out what the root cause is. And so I love that idea, starting with awareness, take the breath and then solve it. But you really got to know, what the core issue is, kind of like with anything in life.
And his book helps identify a bunch more than even than we talked about. And so it is really helpful to even like start to name them. I can't remember them all right now, but because like some of them don't really apply to you and you kind of let go of them, but like the ones that you do apply to you become a lot more meaningful once there's sort of a name to it and you can start to recognize it.
Yeah. I'm really curious, like, we're still recording, so, I'll probably include this as part of the podcast. So, those of you who are listening to and the panelists or whoever, let me know how interesting this is to you because, this might be one of those areas that we think about doing a book study on, just because I think it could really help a lot of us out there. And I think it's such a good topic to kind of talk through and dialogue about more so than just, when should I 3-bet? I think some of that's easier to learn on your own than some of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I know. For me, I definitely suffer from entitlement tilt the most. And two different styles. One is you have the pocket kings and you think, oh, I'm going to win a big pot with this. And then, an ace comes on the flop in a situation where your opponent almost always has an ace, and yet you still lose a lot more chips with that, even though you should know better. Or playing someone that they're clearly new to the game. I've been playing this game for years. I should be so much better.
Yeah.
But I don't stop and think, they can get aces too. They can get a good hand. You still have to use your skill to overdo that. And I still suffer from that to this day, despite having read his book and despite having worked on it.
That's really well said. Yeah, for sure.
So here's the tilt that he talks about. He talks about running bad tilt, injustice tilt, hate losing tilt, mistake tilt, entitlement tilt, revenge tilt, and then desperation tilt. Those are the main ones that he talks about.
So have you guys all read the book? So I know John listened to it. Rob, you've read it. Chris has read it. Yep. Paul Havens has read it. I don't know if Taylor's listening in or not. I wonder if he's read it.
I have not.
You have not. John or George Sanford, John Vensky, have you guys read it at all? I'll throw something in the chat if you have. So far just Taylor and I have not. Okay. And you guys all loved it. You guys all thought it was great.
Well, I got into this type of the mental part of games, period, a long time ago in golf. I was struggling with my golf game, and I was still a poker player, but I never really thought about the mental part of it helping my poker game. It never really made sense to me, but I was having difficulties with my golf game, and I found a book called Zen Golf. And it talked about how your mental attitude and how to perform your best by using some mental tools like meditation and things like this. And so then I happened to see this book, the Tendler book, and wow, it's really eye-opening when you start applying that same thing to poker. I never even thought of that before, but it really made a huge difference in at least the way I handle myself at the table. At least I'm not an asshole anymore.
Well, no, I'm kidding. You're not. No, you're not. You're fantastic. It's actually hard for me to imagine you being that way in the past, because I've only known you in the last 5 years or something, and I've never even sensed that. Yeah, I think
I used to get pretty pissed off.
Okay, it's interesting because sometimes I think about this and I say, well, how much do I need to put into this? Because, my primary goal in playing poker is for fun. Now, I want to get better. Trust me, I'm competitive, and we're doing a podcast. I mean, obviously we're trying to get better, but my primary goal is fun. So how much do I need to worry about this or whatever? But the reality is it's not as fun when I'm emotionally struggling. I mean, so, I want to be better. And I think having more mental control or whatever, I think, makes me better, and that's going to, be more enjoyable. But I think even just generally, I don't get angry at the table. I don't think I've ever really like gotten angry at somebody or whatever, but it does stick with me. And so I think what would be more fun for me is if it didn't stick with me, if I could logically release some of that stuff in the middle of playing, that tournament or that night, not being so worked up about, something that went against me, that entitlement tilt or whatever it might be. So even though I think my primary goal is fun, I think this would actually lead into having more fun.
Well, not only that, but this more so than most poker books has applicability to your entire life, because this understanding how to deal with mental issues, because no matter what you do, mental things come up. You get frustrated. You get angry at something. And it's not just at the poker table, but these techniques are applicable to your entire life, no matter what it is. I mean, the particulars are going to be different. You might not have entitlement tilt, but you're still going to have an emotion that gets in the way of you experiencing life or performing the way you want to perform. So that's why I think this one is particularly good, especially for recreational poker players, because although they may not spend a ton of time playing poker, they spend a lot of time living.
That's really well said. I couldn't agree more. I think about even just my time in the corporate world and some of those tilty things that can happen in the corporate world. I think of my family situation and some of the tilty things that can happen with family and extended family and holidays and all of those things. And I think that's a really good point, John. I love it so much. We'll wrap it up there. Thanks to the rec players who are part of the panel, Running Aces, our official sponsor as always, and go to recpokertraining.com to check out everything else that we have going on. So until next week, good luck on and off the felt.